It didn't look like much, just a block of cast iron, painted Chevrolet orange, bolted together with cheap fasteners and shoved under the hood of cars built for everyday Americans. To the outside world, it was nothing special. But to the men who built it, and the millions who would drive it, it was something else entirely. This was the small block Chevy, the so-called cheap Chevy engine. It didn't win by brute force, it didn't roar louder than Ford's mighty V8s or post wild horsepower numbers on paper. What it did was far more dangerous. It outsmarted Ford by being simple, by being affordable, by being indestructible. To mechanics it was a blank canvas, to hot rodders it was a secret weapon, to Ford executives it was a nightmare they couldn't kill. The small block Chevy became America's most swapped, most raced, and most beloved engine. From family station wagons to drag strip legends, from dusty farm trucks to screaming NASCAR stock cars, it was everywhere. Its reach was so vast that by the 1970s it wasn't just an engine, it was a cultural symbol. But to understand why Ford's V8 empire trembled, we have to rewind. The year was 1955. Ford had the flathead V8, a piece of history. It had carried hot rodders, moonshiners, and GIs returning from war. It was cheap, powerful, and the ultimate badge of pride for young gearheads. Ford had the muscle. Chevrolet? They were stuck with inline sixes, engines with the charisma of a farm tractor. Reliable? Yes. Exciting? Not even close. Inside GM's engineering halls, one man, Ed Cole, was told to change everything. His mission? Create a V8 that was smaller, lighter, cheaper to build, easier to service, and yet strong enough to last for decades. It sounded like a fantasy. But Cole had a vision, and in 1955 Chevrolet unleashed it. The 265 cubic inch small block V8 wasn't just an engine, it was a revolution hiding in plain sight. At first glance, the Chevy small block looked ordinary, but inside, it was pure genius. Where Ford's flathead V8 struggled with overheating and poor breathing, the Chevy had overhead valves that let it breathe deeply, making more power with less fuel. Its lightweight design shaved off nearly 150 pounds compared to Ford's engines, making it perfect for racers looking for speed. And its block? Pure iron strength, with 5 sturdy main bearings holding the crankshaft steady. The brilliance was in the details. Thin wall casting made it cheap to produce in massive numbers. A compact size meant it could fit in almost anything. Sedans, coupes, Corvettes, pickup trucks. And the cylinder heads? Simple enough for any backyard mechanic to modify with a grinder and a little ambition. Ford's flathead V8 had been born in the 1930s. The small block Chevy was born for the future. Almost overnight, it became the darling of hot rodders. Here was an engine that you could buy cheap at a junkyard, tear down in your garage, and rebuild into a fire-breathing monster with parts you ordered out of a catalog. It wasn't exotic, it wasn't fancy, but it was endlessly adaptable. Ford guys didn't know what hit them. On the drag strip, Chevy small blocks were running harder, revving higher, and lasting longer. On the street, they gave even humble Chevys a shot of adrenaline that Ford couldn't match. Chevrolet had done the unthinkable. They had taken the throne of performance away from Ford, using the cheapest, simplest engine anyone had ever seen. What made the small block so dangerous wasn't just performance, it was accessibility. Chevy priced the engine to move. It wasn't some high-dollar exotic reserved for sports cars. It went into everything. Bel Airs, station wagons, Impalas, pickup trucks. By the early 1960s, there were millions of them on the road. That meant parts were everywhere. Every junkyard, every corner garage, every speed shop had piles of small block components ready to be mixed and matched. Need a bigger carb? Grab one. Need high compression heads? They were waiting. Need a stroker crank? Aftermarket companies were lining up to sell you one. The engine became a mechanical Lego set for an entire generation of gearheads. Kids who couldn't afford a brand new car could scrape together a junkyard small block, rebuild it in their parents' driveway, and suddenly have a street machine capable of embarrassing Fords twice its price. It wasn't just about speed, it was about identity. Owning a small block Chevy meant you were part of something bigger, a culture of do-it-yourself mechanics, drag racers, and backyard engineers. Meanwhile, Ford was stuck. Their Y-block V8 was heavier, more complex, and harder to modify. It was strong, sure, but it never caught on with hot rodders. Ford's engines felt corporate. Chevy's small block felt human. By the mid-1960s, a rebellion was brewing. The cheap Chevy engine wasn't just beating Ford on the track, it was taking over America's garages. If the street was the small block's playground, the racetrack was its kingdom. Chevrolet's new engine exploded onto the scene in drag racing. Its ability to rev higher than Ford's flatheads gave it a lethal edge. Racers could push it to 6,000 RPM, something unheard of at the time, without the block splitting in half. In circle track racing, it became the go-to weapon for short-track heroes. Its compact size meant cars handled better, its durability meant they finished races, and its affordability meant even underfunded teams could compete. Then came the Corvette. In 1957, Chevy's fiberglass sports car received a fuel-injected version of the small block. Suddenly, a car that had been dismissed as a toy was running with Europe's best. America had found its weapon, and it was powered by the cheap Chevy engine. By the 1970s, NASCAR was dominated by small-block Chevys. Modifieds, late models, even drag cars. Everywhere you looked, the bow-tie V8 was there. Ford still fought back with big blocks, but pound for pound, dollar for dollar, the small-block Chevy was untouchable. Mechanics called it the mouse motor, small, quick, impossible to kill. And like a mouse, it got into everything. Success breeds enemies. Inside Ford's boardrooms, executives were furious. Their mighty V8s were being humiliated by Chevy's cheap little motor. On the street, Ford guys were losing drag races to junkyard Chevys. On the track, Ford had to spend big to keep up. But even inside General Motors, the small block faced resistance. Corporate higher-ups didn't like the idea of Chevrolet dominating so completely. Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, they all had their own V8s, and they wanted their share of the spotlight. GM's internal politics meant engineers often had to fight just to keep the small block evolving. Then came the 1970s. Emissions laws, fuel crises, and new regulations strangled performance engines across Detroit. Horsepower numbers plummeted. Ford's V8s suffered. Chevy's small block was hit too, but its cheap, adaptable design meant it could survive the storm. By the 1980s, while Ford scrambled with new modular engines, the Chevy small block was still there, still winning, still cheap. Its very simplicity had saved it. By now the numbers are almost unbelievable. Over 100 million small block Chevys built, countless race wins, entire industries built around it. Walk into any auto parts store in America, and you'll find small block parts on the shelf. Need a new one? Summit Racing will ship you a brand new crate engine to your door. No other engine in history has that kind of reach. Ford has had great engines, the Flathead, the Windsor, the Coyote, but none have matched the sheer cultural dominance of the cheap Chevy engine. Even today, builders still turn to it. Restorers, hot rodders, drag racers, its DNA is everywhere. The LS series may have replaced it, but the original small block spirit lives on in every garage-built monster. It didn't just outsmart Ford's V8, it outsmarted time itself. Some engines become famous for being exotic, the Hemi, the Boss 429, the Ferrari 512. They're icons because they're rare, expensive, and untouchable. The small block Chevy became a legend for the opposite reason. It was everywhere, it was cheap, it was ordinary, and yet in the hands of ordinary Americans it became extraordinary. Mechanics called it God's typewriter. Reliable, predictable, unstoppable. A million-mile motor if you treated it right. It was an engine that grew up with America. From the golden age of hot rodding, through the oil crisis, through the rise of emissions controls, and into the modern era of crate engines. Ford built engines that made headlines. Chevy built one that made history. It started as a cheap gamble, a desperate attempt to catch Ford. But in the end, the small block Chevy didn't just catch Ford's V8, it buried it. It became the engine of the people, the weapon of underdogs, the heart of a million garages. It powered families to school, racers to glory, and dreamers to freedom. Decades later, when you hear the rumble of a small block Chevy, you're not just hearing an engine, you're hearing the sound of America. This is Apex from Mythic Car Stories. Like and subscribe and join the adventure.